How do I get into my UEFI settings? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. UEFI, which stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, is a more powerful and flexible replacement of what we formerly referred to as your BIOS, or Basic Input-Output System, from the days of the original IBM PC. It's common, just by the way, to refer to UEFI as BIOS, even though that's technically incorrect. My theory is that BIOS is easier to pronounce, and for those of us who've been in the industry for decades, we kind of always think of it as BIOS. But the reality is, these days, almost all computers have this UEFI. Both UEFI and BIOS are firmware. In other words, they're software stored in hardware physically present on your computer. They're typically in chips on the main circuit board or motherboard. The most common task for the UEFI is to locate, load, and run the software stored on your boot device. In other words, they're the piece of software that knows how to start the process that loads the operating system when you turn on your machine. Both have settings you can change. You used to need to know an obscure keystroke to get to the BIOS. With UEFI, it can be somewhat easier. The most common reason to access UEFI is to change the boot order. For example, to enable booting from a USB device rather than the internal disk. There are many other options in most of the UEFI configurations, but again, most of them are safe to ignore. The defaults generally work just fine. Now, I can't unfortunately show you the UEFI on any of my machines because all of my screen capture software isn't running when the UEFI is shown. But here's a photograph of the UEFI on one of my machines. So, as it turns out, the obscure keystroke I mentioned earlier, that actually still remains. It kind of has to. The other techniques really only work if you've already got Windows running and installed. So there needs to be another way. You might need this method, for example, when you're dealing with a new bare metal, in other words, empty hard drive computer. If there's no operating system, you still need to be able to get into the UEFI settings. Unfortunately, there's no standard magic keystroke. It varies on both the manufacturer and even the specific computer model. In a very rough order of commonality, those keystrokes might be the del or delete key, F2, F10, F1, F12, which is actually more often used to display a much more simple boot choice menu, and occasionally even the escape key. To be clear, on some laptops, those F keys like F2 and F10, they may or may not need you to also hold down an FN key at the same time. Timing, as it turns out, is everything when it comes to the magic keystroke. That's probably the most frustrating aspect of this method. It's just knowing when to type or hold down the key. In general, the sequence is turn on the machine, immediately type or hold down the magic key. If some kind of UEFI or BIOS boot screen appears, look for information indicating which key to type. You might see press del to enter UEFI settings, and then immediately type that key. If the Windows logo appears, it's too late. When it works, you should find yourself in a UEFI configuration screen. If not, you'll be booted into Windows, or you'll receive an error message about there not being anything to boot from. You'll just need to try again. If Windows is running, you could use a different approach. It might require several steps, but it's not dependent on knowing any magic keystroke or typing at just the right time. Let me show you. It all starts in Settings. System. We'll go down to Recovery, and then Advanced Startup. You'll see that the button says Restart Now because that's exactly what's going to happen. The computer will restart into the advanced setup scenario. Once we're in the advanced options, we'll go to Troubleshoot and then UEFI firmware settings. Now, I have to say, even here, you may see different options. In fact, there may even be an intermediate screen for advanced settings of some sort. This is one of those things that, again, varies depending on exactly what your machine is, how it's configured, and so on. UEFI firmware settings will then cause your machine to restart and open up into whatever those settings happen to be for you. Like I said earlier, I can't show you because this is a virtual machine, and I just don't have the option to actually screen capture a true UEFI screen. Now, there is another way in Windows. This one doesn't work on all computers, but as it turns out, it's a really, really handy approach when it does. In an administrative command prompt or PowerShell, so you'll notice I'm running terminal admin, we type the following command: shutdown space /R for reboot /FW for firmware. In other words, reboot into the firmware /T1. The /T1 says delay 1 second before rebooting, where you could be whatever time you want it to be. 1 second seems like a reasonable approach. And we'll hit that. And the machine restarts. Like I said, it now will go directly into the UEFI settings for this machine, if that's possible. We don't need to mess with our UEFI settings very often. Nonetheless, every once in a while, we need to make a change or check a setting. So now you've got 2 or 3 ways to get there from here. For updates, for comments, for links relating to this topic and more, visit askleo.com/191715. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.